Welcome to Be Happy, Feel Great, where we bring in experts that have achieved happiness and success in their areas. Today I have a very special guest, Zach Studenroth, who is the Executive Director of the Cutchogue-New Suffolk Historical Council, along with a very visible face on historical preservation on the East End. And we have a very special show today, so I'd like to welcome Zach. Zach, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is great, you know, and we have a different show today.
Okay.
You have an interest that is very unique, and you're working on a project that's unique. Being involved with the Cutchogue Historical Council.
Right.
First of all, you're an author. You recently published a book.
It was a big project. I've often dreamed of writing a book, you know, perhaps all of us do. I know you've authored a book. Gets to be such a overwhelming, you know, waking, sleeping every moment.
Nobody
takes over.
realizes how much work.
Yeah, it's like another member of the family.
Absolutely.
So it was a lot of fun. And I must confess that I kind of talked myself into needing to do it because as a relatively new director of the Historical Council, I really wasn't as familiar with the local history of the area as I felt I really should be. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to really jump in and get to know some new people, researching photographs, and also doing the research to make the book. It needs to be entertaining. It's a book of photographs, so it's not intended to be a very in-depth discussion of the history of the place. But of course, you need to be accurate. So the worst thing that can happen.
The photos that you have are
great.
Just great. How did you collect all these photos?
Well, we have a secret friend. She's actually on the board of the Historical Council. Mariella Ostrowski is the local history librarian right there in Cutchogue, downtown.
Okay.
And so she knows her collection very well. She has systematically, in recent years, kind of built up that photo collection. So she was a tremendous resource. And where she didn't have something, she tended to know who might. There's some local folks who descended from earlier families, and they have images. Another big contributor was the Southold Historical Society, just up the road. They have a very fine collection of pictures. So between the two, and then you start digging in, and I found other leads, so it was fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's a great book. You know, it's right here.
Yeah.
You want to just hold it up for us,
sure.
you know, let everybody see it. And it's the, I think if you could just hold it towards me.
Sure.
Hold it towards
you?
me.
Okay, sorry. Yep.
And this book just came out a few months ago, and it's been selling like crazy, and it's really a fundraiser for the Historical Council, too.
It's been a good fundraiser. Of course, Christmas is coming up.
Well,
so
Christmas may be over by the time we watch this show.
All right, but always an excuse to give somebody else.
Christmas will be coming in 2014, and maybe you should get it right now.
Right around the corner.
Yeah, but it's just, I have bought copies of it. I want to buy more and continue to give it out as a gift. If somebody wants that, Zach, where can they get it?
Well, the Historical Council has a gift shop, and it's, of course, in summertime, we're open weekends. So that's one place to get it. But we have a website, which is Cutchogue-New-Suffolk-History.org. And that provides all the contact information that anyone would need.
Okay.
If they wanted to
Maybe if we could get that up on the screen and people could see it. And it'll be projected throughout the show. And it's great that there wasn't a book. There was actually a void in the Cutchogue-New Suffolk area. I've seen them on Southold and Greenport. Mattatuck, I think, came out with one. And your book has just been... It's been wonderful.
We didn't have it. So, and really there's so much important early history for the entire town of Southold, which took place in Cutchogue. And that kind of just explains the choice of the cover image, which is the old house, appropriately called because it's probably the oldest house in New York State, which is part of our campus of historical buildings. And that was, coincidentally, was recognized in, I think it was about 1938. It's right on the cover. And it was discovered just in time to be restored in conjunction with the town's 300th anniversary, which they celebrated in 1940. So that really became a focus of attention during those celebrations. And so the picture that we chose for the cover was actually taken at that time, when the old house had been recently restored, and there was a lot of festivities and people dressed up in Revolutionary War period outfits and all of that. So a lot of fun then. We still maintain the house. It is still considered New York State's oldest, and it's quite a treasure. So we're very proud of that.
It is.
Yeah.
And to have something like that on Eastern Long Island,
Yeah.
it's just great. And if anybody hasn't seen the old house, it's something. When is the Historical Council open? When can they view it?
Well, we're open regularly summer weekends, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday in the afternoon from 1 to 4. We're also open by appointment.
Okay.
Occasionally, we'll get phone calls from a descendant, let's say, or just someone who's coming out with family members and they're looking for something interesting to do. So we will accommodate small groups of people by advanced appointment. Yeah, but our biggest mission is to maintain that and the other historical buildings. What's actually somewhat amusing is that the old house, although it has been there since 1660, it was actually built in Southold in 1649 and moved there. And
Yeah.
all of our other buildings that are there were also moved to that location to save them because they were in danger. They were going to be demolished or threatened in some way. But the irony is that our oldest building of 1649 was actually moved there also. So it's not on its original site either.
But it was.
It was saved.
moved about 10 years later.
It was moved
right?
early in its
Early,
history.
still
Yeah,
back in the 1600s.
In the
and
1600s, and
I'm
there
sure
it is ever
Southold
since.
wishes they could have it back today.
Well,
huh?
they can't. It's too late. They've given
Well,
up.
if people
So,
want to visit it, that's great. So June, July, August,
early September.
Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays,
Yeah.
that and all the houses.
And we do special events. We have a garden tour. We have an antiques show. We have an old car show in October. So whenever we have those special events, we make an effort to open the houses in conjunction. Of course, people need to call ahead to make sure what the schedule is. And again, through the website, it's really the best way to reach us.
A lot of great events there, too.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, the interesting thing is, so we have this old house from
Yeah.
the 1600s, and very unique that the Cutchogue-New Suffolk Historical Council owns a cemetery or
Yes.
burying ground, as it's called.
I was astonished when I first came on board with the council to learn that we not only had the responsibility for managing this, which had been accepted years ago, but that we actually owned the site. It's very unusual for a historical agency, a private, not-for-profit group such as ours, to actually have title to a burying ground. But I think the circumstances surrounding that is at probably 100 years or more ago, it was closed. So it was no longer open for continued burials. And the church, the local church, therefore, had the responsibility for maintaining it, but it had become a historic site. So it was no longer a kind of property that a church is really in a position to continue to maintain. And so when the Historical Council was first created in, I believe it's 1960, we just celebrated our 50th, the church saw an opportunity for a local organization whose mission would be more appropriate to the maintenance of the property. And so the council did take title, and we've been maintaining it ever since.
That is
So it's a noble effort.
Unique piece of
Yeah.
property, too.
Yeah.
Gravestones that are in there.
Yeah.
How far back do they go?
I believe 1717, we're in that early period. Remember, Cutchogue being the first satellite community that branched out of the original Southold settlement of 1640. So Cutchogue is settled in the 1660s and 70s, and they have the responsibility, there we go, of laying out a burying ground for their local residents. And so
And look at some of those. Look at how old, you know.
that one
I'm
in
looking at
particular
it.
is great. That's a double in the sense that there are two burials there. I'm forgetting exactly who. They may be husband and wife. They may be siblings. but they died and were interred within relatively close time period of one another. And you'll see that from time to time. And if you look in the distance, you can see the footstone, the smaller stone off in the background, which is also a double.
Yeah,
Often
I see
those
that. Yeah,
footstones
yeah.
will
Look at
mimic
that.
the shape of the main headstone.
And what is that? Is that sandstone
That's
that's made out of?
sandstone, what most folks think of as brownstone.
Okay.
It's that brown sandstone that faces facades of row houses in the city.
And then I'm looking behind there.
Yeah.
Is that like a slate or
Those are
something
slates,
that's
the
back
gray
there?
ones.
Yeah.
And the gray, the slates typically predate the brownstone. And they took a very sharp inscription. Very often they survive in brilliant, it's brittle. The slate is brittle, so it's vulnerable to being broken.
Okay.
But if it's not hit,
Yeah,
I don't know if we have a view of that.
Is
but
there any other ones that, I don't know if we could get a different one up there to take a look at?
That's-
Okay, oh,
okay.
that's great.
This is
Look at
more of
that.
a general view, and you can see, when these stones are first set in the ground, you have to sort of think that approximately half of the length of the stone that you see is underground. And that just keeps them as vertical as possible. But over the years, with freezing and thawing actions, they tend to begin to tip either forward or backward. And the tilting in and of itself is not of a great threat until they tilt to the point where they want to fall. Mm-hmm. And if they're tilting too far and they fall, then very likely they're going to break. And so one of the interventions that we want to make at this stage, you can see the one in the foreground is beginning to lean. It's a very simple exercise to get that stone upright again. Once it's broken, it's a much more costly and time-consuming repair.
Sure.
So
sure.
That's one of the
Well,
things
I was
that we
in
look
there
for.
last week, Zach.
Yep.
I took a walk through it, and there's another great shot. Look at,
Yeah, this is an
you know,
overall view.
and
One advantage that we have here is that there's very little tree cover. Now, trees provide lovely shade in the middle of a wide open, hot burying ground in the middle of the summer, if you're out there surveying it or doing repairs. But the problem is that the trees often present potential threats in terms of either growing and uprooting the stones, which will happen, or from tree limbs falling and breaking them. Mm-hmm. So we're fortunate at this particular site that there's very little trees out there. So that's one condition that we don't have to address. That's
it's great.
commonplace.
Yeah.
to
And
most of the rest of
even
these
when I
sites.
walked through,
Yeah.
it seemed like, after almost 300 years,
Yeah.
there is a lot of damage.
There's-
It's
there's-
in great
yeah.
shape considering how old it is.
Yes.
But it looks like either vandalism or the
Yeah.
weather,
Yeah.
maybe some branches fell, natural
Sure,
causes.
sure.
And
Yeah.
this is what you're looking to do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're looking now
Correct.
to launch
Yeah.
a project in
Yeah.
2014?
Yes. Well, there are really two parallel objectives of surveying a burying ground like this. And what that means is to literally go stone to stone, do a photographic recording, and we demonstrated this at a workshop a few weeks back,
Right.
where if you just take a photograph straight on in pure daylight, oftentimes it's difficult to decipher the inscription because they've weathered, etc. But with proper lighting techniques, you can highlight those inscriptions. So one purpose of the survey is to photograph and to record that inscription, because we realize that they continue to weather away to the point where the naked eye can no longer read them. So that's about capturing the genealogical information that these stones contain. The other purpose of the survey is to try to repair them or stabilize them from further deterioration. So for example, the stones that are tipping, those are the ones that we want to set back up again. There are techniques of injecting consolidants that will keep stones that are beginning to fall apart from deteriorating further. One condition that isn't, it looks worse than it is. I think we saw some shots of a few stones that are encrusted with lichens. And you think, well, you can barely even read them. Mm-hmm. The lichens don't really damage the stones so much. We call it biogrowth. It's sort of a general term that covers all things growing on the stones. It could be mold, it could be algae, etc.
Right.
There are very simple techniques for cleaning that off. It has to be done very carefully and gently. and it improves their appearance. But it's not always necessarily required, because if it's only the appearance of the stone, you're not really repairing it. You're just making it better to look at.
Yeah, it seemed to be on the limestone seemed to have more of it. Is that usually?
Well,
does
different
it matter
stones.
which,
The one
material?
stone that will usually not host any of this biogrowth is a granite. One reason
which is being used today for
which
the
is
most part.
from about the last 100 years or so. By about 1900, the earlier softer stones that were more difficult to quarry and more difficult to carve fell out of fashion, and granite quarries opened up in New England, and the cost of the granite must have come down. It became more economical, and so people tended to move toward the granite, and today that's the predominant stone. It's extremely hard. It maintains its polish. You can look at a stone that was erected 100 or more years ago and it's still polished. So those are the stones that are very resistant to this. The softer stones, like the marble, brownstone, just the surfaces begin to decay from acid rain and other effects, and they're more porous, and they're the ones that host the biogrowth. So we can clean them fairly easily. We have to be very careful that the action of removing all this growth isn't at all destructive. We use wooden tools, never metal, never touch a stone with anything made of metal. And you'll see a typical condition, we're in good shape with this site, is the damage that lawnmowers will make and weed whackers. And that's metal coming into contact with the very soft stone. You see scrapes.
Sure, another problem.
Another
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
So these are conditions which are not inevitable. These are ones that we have to look at proper, routines of maintenance, proper,
I always heard, like, back in the day, they would actually have animals grazing in burying grounds, and that was their
absolutely.
natural lawnmower.
And I read recently that, I don't know if it's in D.C. or some place that's very highly populated, apparently they do have a flock of sheep in there doing this. The problem that we would have in Cutchogue, which is still relatively rural, is that the dogs and the sheep it's a bad combination.
Oh,
So
sure.
now you need a shepherd, so.
And cars, too. They
And
didn't have
cars.
cars back then.
Yeah. So the historical council would have to put a shepherd on staff to sort of mind the flock. So
Maybe that could be part of your
I'll-
job description.
I'll propose it to the board for their next year's budget.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. And, our show is Be Happy, Feel Great.
Yeah.
And I think you could appreciate Zach's enthusiasm with historical preservation. And I went at one point when he had one of the workshops, and the people that were involved were, they were just also as enthusiastic and as excited as you are,
Well,
and
It's a very lucky thing for me to enjoy what I do. I feel like I'm a very lucky person. Whatever your calling is, whatever speaks to you.
Sure, right.
I feel very, very fortunate to be able to do the things I enjoy doing, and I like communicating that to others. So, for example, the Historical Council has a wonderful board. They're all volunteers, a staff of one. And we rely very heavily on volunteer support for all the programs, events, et cetera, that we do. The Burying Ground Project in particular, we're looking to involve as many volunteers as we can, get going there. And it's not, it's the sort of thing that will go out for a weekend, several weekends in a row, et cetera, to do the survey work, to do some of the repairs. It doesn't require a huge commitment, I guess is what I'm saying. You don't have to change your lifestyle to volunteer to go out to the burying ground for 5 or 6 hours on a Saturday when the weather is nice.
right,
And just be
nice
involved.
weather, outside, probably
right.
learn a lot.
Yes, yeah.
You have a consultant also that
Yes.
you work with on this
Yes.
project?
Well, what we always need, and I consider myself in this particular area something of an amateur. In other words, I have the skills to undertake the survey work, which is about recording the stones and noting the conditions and photographing, et cetera. But when it comes to the actual work on the stone, you need someone with a lot of experience, a professional stone conservator. So in this case, it would be someone who knows how to reattach two pieces of stone that might need pinning, need very specialized types of adhesives, perhaps an epoxy, perhaps not, all sorts of special materials, special techniques. and he or she is also the individual who can train a volunteer to do the things that volunteers can do. So that's why we have an association. This fellow in particular is Joel Snodgrass, who's a very seasoned professional stone guy from up the Huntington area. So we're lucky to have someone local that we can call on. And so he's on board to come back in the spring when we want to really launch the project. And it'll occupy our council next year.
What a great opportunity for somebody who has an interest in this.
Yeah.
And again, everybody, and that's what really makes it exciting, is people have different interests. And yours with all the history and with this burying grounds now, and people that are interested, they could really learn a lot with your expertise, and Joel's also, really.
And one other interesting dimension of this, now that we're living in a digital age, it's interesting, when we do our research, we oftentimes find old inventories that have been done. People have gone out, let's say in the 1930s, and have surveyed the stones. But of course, they were living in a pre-digital era. They were living in the typewriter era. So they would come back from the field and translate their field notes into an alphabetical list, because that's how you find things. You start at A and you go to Z. Now we take these inventories and they don't tell us anything about where any of these stones were. They're just all the names. So we can put that information into a contemporary survey, but the ideal outcome nowadays is to put all that up on your website, so that someone who is researching their genealogy, getting genealogical information, et cetera, tracing their roots, they don't physically need to travel to Cutchogue, New York, to access that information. So that's kind of the alternate outcome of this whole project, is to record all these stones and try to repair the ones that can be, stabilize conditions, et cetera, but also to put all of that data up on the website where it's searchable and where people who are doing this work can easily access the information.
Wow.
Because that's what they're looking for.
That's
So
really...
that's
So
kind of
you're
exciting.
taking an organization with the oldest house in New York State, and you're bringing it to this digital age where these descendants, probably a lot of the names, what was it, the Budds and the Tuttles and the Wickhams,
Hortons,
and a lot of these, the Hortons, some of these founding fathers and people who have been around for generations are buried in the burying ground.
Yes.
And their descendants that are probably all over the country, if not all over the world today.
It's all at your fingertips
can just
now.
go right up to their computer, and would they be able to see the actual picture of the stone?
You can
and
link the
everything?
image to the data, that you click on. If you're bringing up the name Mary Tuttle, for example, or some name that you're researching,
Right.
you can click that. It can automatically bring up an image of the stone. We can also link old survey information to that record. So, for example, if the inscription itself is no longer decipherable, or you can't read the epitaph, or if there's something that's no longer visible, if you have a record of that from a prior time, such as a survey done 50 or 60 years ago, you can link that to that record as well, so that you can see what it is now, you can read as much as you can, but it also accesses the other
So the
information.
Cutchogue-New Suffolk Historical Council is really on the cutting edge of...
Small but mighty. For a
And-
small organization.
And if anybody would like to get involved, how would they do that? How can they contact you?
Well,
or the
best way is either to email in care of the website, or our phone numbers, 631-734-7122.
Okay, and that's the website on the bottom of the screen right now. So
Okay.
it's the Cutchogue-New Suffolk history.org.
Yep.
And the number was 631
734
734
7122.
7122.
Yeah.
And leave a message. I'm sure that, this time of year, there's not that many people, but just to get involved for the springtime. Great stuff. And I think, too, that if anybody's interested in Zach's book, you could also go to the website and email or make a phone call.
Sure.
That's another great thing to have. And there are some photos, I believe, in there of the old burying ground, right?
Yeah. There's a wonderful one, I believe it dates from the 1920s, and it's special, I think, because it shows all these guys with their tools, the shovels, the pitchforks, I don't know what they got. And apparently at that time, once a year, the community, this was a civic, sort of a
Well,
civic.
we don't want to keep people.
We don't want to
gotta
keep them guessing.
show them actually a
Okay.
little bit of
We
what it
don't want to
looks
keep them
like. If
guessing.
you could just hold that
So,
open.
here are all these
It's got to
fellows.
be towards, let me see it.
Let's see.
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so if
So
you
there
want to
they all
explain it
are.
now.
Yeah, well, apparently there was a tradition then that all these guys would get together on a particular day and bring their tools. And there's an old car in the background there, and I think that's one way to kind of date this thing. We date it from the mid to late 1920s.
Looks like a Model A
And-
back there.
Yeah. So,
Model T, maybe?
so they would, you know, we nowadays, you know, if we don't keep things mowed, you know, if 2 or 3 weeks goes by, occasionally we'll get a phone call from some local resident wondering why we're sort of letting things go. That amuses me when I look at these old pictures, because I think back in that day, if this thing got spruced up once a year, it was considered itself lucky. But the other thing that's hard to make out in that picture.
Good stuff, good stuff.
There was a stone posted picket fence that at one time surrounded the whole site. And this is an interesting kind of fence that we have out here
This
on Long
is,
Island.
I saw the fence in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I understand that you're going to be doing some work with it. Maybe some of the donations that people might want to make
Sure, that would be,
can help for it. Maybe some of the volunteers would be interested in working.
Sure.
It is stones, they're going to replicate it.
Yeah.
But anyway, if anybody is interested in being involved with the Cutchogue-New Suffolk Historical Council, again, you could contact Zach or any of the other members. Go to their website, there's a phone number there. Website is cutchogue-newsuffolkhistory.org. And it's really exciting, some wonderful things, and don't forget to get Zach's book. Good stuff.
that's it.
Okay.